The background to this webinar is that recent health and safety legislation changes in Australia and indeed in New Zealand mean that corporations must take a far more active approach to managing the risks associated with corporate travel or risk criminal prosecution. To cover the topic today and to give us a guidance, we have Alana Titterton and Tony Ridley. And I've got a few that have come through, but there's a couple that's actually a recurring theme, actually, around some of the sort of sharing economy type thing. So I know, Tony, you touched on it during your part, but I'm keen to get Alana's view as well around, you know, what do organizations need to do as the likes of the Ubers and the Airbnbs and the Lyfts start to become more and more pervasive. So I'm keen to understand that piece, and I'm also keen to understand a little bit around your views on when does the individual start to take responsibility, and how does the individual's behavior then relate back to the organizational risk risk profile. So if I as an individual choose to make certain decisions that are out of policy, how does that relate back, and if something bad happens, what happens in that situation? So there's two questions I think in there. It just very quickly your perspective, Alana, first maybe, and then Tony, and then we'll see if any other questions come through. But if you could just give me a quick view on that, I think that would help some of the people on the call.
Sure. I might take your second question first around, where does individual responsibility come into place? Well, first things first, regulators tend to look at system deficiencies before anything else. So you absolutely want to make sure that you have an effective system in place for workers to follow. And you want to make sure that you're providing instruction, information and training in how to use those systems, because individuals can't be expected to just know how to do something right. You can't just say, look, it's common sense, they should just be doing this. That's not going to be sufficient. It's not going to cut mustard with your regulators. So you've got to get that system right. And it's only when you've got that system right, it's effective, you're subjecting it to continuous improvement and all of those things that that Tony was talking about in his 7-step process, that you can really start talking about individual responsibility, and only when you're having sort of those flagrant breaches of the policies and procedures, does that really come into play with regulators? And you want to make sure that when you're investigating incidents, when you're investigating near misses, you're working out, well, where are actually the deficiencies in our systems or with our people? Do we need to be looking at our training regime and improving those sorts of things as well? So that's what I want to say about organisational responsibility. In terms of the first question, I mean, information sharing is absolutely important. One of the duties under the legislation that we didn't talk about, having such a small amount of time to talk, is this horizontal consultation duty. So a duty to share information, essentially, consult, coordinate and cooperate in relation to health and safety matters. So all of these providers of travel arrangements have to get together and share information. So, you should be seeing information about hazards and risks on these sorts of websites being shared around. I think in the travel context, the use of social media to provide information about hazards and risks is a very, very useful mechanism, and we should be doing more to use those sorts of mechanisms in this space. And that's all I want to say at this point.
Thanks, Alana. That's great. Tony, your perspective?
Yeah, just briefly, you'll hear the expression a lot in health and safety and risk management and mitigation, fit for purpose. And 9 times out of 10 it's a bit like saying, well, I need to wear a protective head cover to ride a motorbike and then putting on a baseball cap. And it's just not fit for purpose. So when we're looking at a lot of these crowdsourcing or user-generated content, it's simply not fit for purpose. It has a realm that's been spawned from the retail market. It certainly doesn't have the control measures and certainly the requirements by a business to apply a methodology to reduce risk. So if they can do that by using those systems, because there's plenty of systems that you can standardise or improve that were developed in the retail space, it's not necessarily, it should be, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but if you're simply jumping on board because it's a cost saving or it's popular and you're ignoring all of those systems, then it's even probably more incriminating to say, well, we've got all of these systems as they apply within the organisation, but you know what, we choose to ignore that here because we could shave a couple of dollars off. or we could get person from A to B, or they've just got a preference for it and they were just complaining too much. It's not fit for purpose. The user-generated content is not supplementing what should be professional or a systematic approach of content. It's doable, but it just shouldn't be a case of one or the other. It should be either modified or consistently applied within the framework of risk and certainly the standards.
That's great. Look, I've got just one last question here before we wrap, and it's come. There's clearly a number of people in the audience that are from TMCs. So there's a question here to Tony, which is, can you articulate what the legal liabilities are to an agency pre and on trip, and what are the minimum steps required to mitigate that liability? I suspect that's quite a big question, but just give us a quick feel for how we might tackle that question.
Well, Eleanor touched on it. It's a shared duty. If you're part of the contributing mechanism that puts somebody either at risk or prevented risk, then that's a duty shared, whether you're a service provider in travel or whether you're a service provider of high-lift cranes or other safety sort of control mechanisms, firefighting systems. It's a shared duty, and your exposure to that begins, for many, at the pre-travel process. So again, if you were to just say, look, I'm the hirer of this individual, just wander down to the back of this work premises and operate any machinery that find down there, then even as the provider of that manpower, you would be found, well, I won't say negligent, but there would be questions around that process. If a travel management company and their agents are sending people into areas where there's known hazards, or they're not providing preventative elements, or they're prioritising profitability or commerciality over the transaction or over the safety, then there's some serious questions that may be drawn into either liabilities and or failures if there is a negative outcome.